The Chicago Bears are making a left tackle change at the bye week, and while that may upgrade one position, it won't solve all of their problems on the offensive line.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. On the show today, I want to take a deep dive into this Chicago Bears offensive line. We'll start with the left tackle change of Theo Benedet taking over for Braxton Jones, at least in the short-term future here. And then we'll turn our attention to some of the other lingering problems up front, including what to expect from the interior of the offensive line and why I don't know that it's going to get any better as the season goes on, as well as some of the issues in the running game and how the run scheme, I think, is still a work in progress up front. But we start with the left tackle position that we knew had been open and in flux really since they drafted Ozzie Trapillo in the second round. I mean, I don't know, maybe we weren't sure exactly what they were going to do then, but we knew entering training camp with Braxton Jones coming off the injury that they would be a battle between him and Karan Amagaji and Ozzie Trapillo, and then Theo Benedet gets thrown into the mix there, and it's been kind of a news cycle ever since. But after 3 1/4 game of Braxton Jones, he gets pulled for Theo Benedet against the Raiders, and all reports indicate that Jones's benching will continue for now. It sounds like it's sort of a see how it goes as you go, and the Bears are not ruling out the possibility of Braxton Jones returning to the lineup. And that raises some interesting questions in here as well, because I think part of this has been the process of Braxton Jones still recovering from that injury from last season and being, well enough to play, but maybe still not 100% and still trying to get perfect strength and mobility and confidence back in that ankle, and that being a factor in some of the struggles he's had in the early portions of this season. Obviously, another factor is that young guys like Theo Benedet and Ozzie Trapillo have continued to develop and get better, and we haven't necessarily seen Braxton Jones take that step forward just yet. But is that injury related or not? That's kind of the big $1 million question here, because I think it's fair to be critical of Braxton Jones and say, hey, he has not played particularly well through the first 4 games of the season. I think it's valid. I've been a Braxton Jones defender, I think, on this podcast, and I still think it's easy to always assume your backup option is going to be better, and we'll see what Theo Benedet can do. But it's very clear he was not doing great there, and so I understand the bigger picture idea of making the move to a backup at left tackle. It's surprising that it has gotten to the point where Theo Benedet is their best option, but now Karan Amagaji is on injured reserve again with the elbow injury that he kind of randomly had at a practice and then quietly was put on injured reserve and out for a little while. That was kind of a thing that flew under the radar. And then Ozzie Trapillo's been kind of stuck at right tackle because he struggled with the transition to left, so that leaves Theo Benedet by default. And I think it's pretty clear here, and Ben Johnson talked about it on Monday during his press conference, that has more to do with the running game than pass protection being some huge problem or anything along the way. Here's how Ben Johnson talked about Theo and the thought process of the left tackle change.
I think he is a really good run blocker, first and foremost. I think it probably took him just a minute to settle in. It didn't matter which side it was going to be on, right or left. I think he's equally proficient in either one. He's just had such a good spring and summer for us that I've got a lot of confidence there. There's just a few times there in pass protection that we got out of our out of our balance just a little bit, where we got a little top heavy and our head was out in front of our rear end there, and we got to clean that up. But no, I really think he's going to continue to learn. The more reps he gets, the better he's going to get. Him, Ozzy, Braxton, all of them. We're just going to continue to ascend that way. So went out there, competed, didn't bat an eye. Some really good edge rushers there for that particular opponent.
I have some doubts that Theo Benedet is going to represent some major upgrade over Braxton Jones, and I'm not sure that a second-year undrafted rookie free agent is going to come in and instantly be some absolute stud left tackle. But I think there's a couple of takeaways I take from this decision. One, if Braxton Jones is going to be a free agent this offseason anyway, and you are going to let him walk in all likelihood because he'll be looking for a long-term contract, then maybe in some ways you're better off saying, get the younger tackle in there and let him learn and develop, because Theo Benedet, will be here next season and could be a longer-term part of your team. And so this playing time could be valuable towards his individual development. Even if he's not better than Braxton Jones right now, if he's not worse, then it's more of a long-term investment in your future to have Theo Benedet out there as opposed to continuing to roll with Braxton Jones. So that part makes some sense to me. And unless it becomes abundantly clear that Theo is really bad and, just is struggling horribly out there, then you can put Braxton Jones in, and it's in some ways no harm, no foul there. I mean, I guess the harm was whatever problems Theo caused while he was in there, but it's not like you put Braxton Jones in and now Jones is going to be worse than he was before you started. If anything, Jones could be better than he was before you pulled him, because now he'll have at least a game, if not multiple games, to heal up a little bit and not wear down his body and maybe get even closer to whatever 100% might be, and maybe improve a little bit on his own on the side. So I think there can be some long-term benefits here. The other takeaway I have from this is how frustrating and disappointing it is that we spent all offseason talking about the Bears' offensive line upgrades and how much of a priority it was to rebuild the offensive line. And they traded for Joe Tooney and Jonah Jackson and signed Drew Dahlman in free agency and drafted a tackle in the second round. And we're in week 4, and offensive line still feels like maybe the biggest individual offensive issue. I mean, if you account for running game and pass protection issues, certainly position-wise, it's the biggest weakness in the Chicago Bears offense. And on the one hand, it's like, well, darn it, Ryan Poles should have done more to address left tackle. And on the other hand, it's like, he did a lot to address the offensive line. He did draft a tackle, and he did bring back Braxton Jones. He did draft a tackle the year before. He did throw some different things at it. And I don't think we should have expected, Ryan Poles shouldn't be expected to have anticipated the Braxton Jones injury would continue to be a problem for this long. The injury happened in December of last year. We are, now that we're starting October, we're close to 10 months removed from an ankle injury that, yeah, sure, I think there's plenty of room for patience for an injury, but at some point it's like, all right, it's been long enough. If Braxton Jones had, torn his ACL at that point, even by now we would be saying all right, you should be good to go right now. And so the injury obviously has been more troublesome than any of us could have anticipated, and that I would assume more troublesome. I'm willing to give the front office some benefit of the doubt that they didn't think the injury would be this problematic, because it wasn't supposed to be this problematic. It was an unexpectedly problematic injury that has lingered and caused more problems than the Bears thought it would have. And so, they should, I can't necessarily be mad that they didn't prepare for this injury to be as big of a deal. At the end of the day, he did still get 3 new offensive line starters, did draft an offensive tackle in the second round that, again, they thought he could move over to left tackle and play. Even Ben Johnson and the coaching staff thought he could. And it feels like, I don't know, is it Ryan Poles' fault that Ozzy Trapillo couldn't play left tackle right away as a rookie? I mean, I guess, but at the same time, you can easily second guess draft picks, and there was not a left tackle you could have taken with your first overall pick or with your first round pick. There wasn't really a true left tackle that was a good value where you picked Luther Burden. So, I mean, it's easy to say, well, you should have done X, Y, or Z differently when it's not always, those options weren't always as available there. So for now, it's going to be a different left tackle in week 6 after the bye week. I still suspect long term that next year Darnell Wright will probably be your starting left tackle week 1, and then Ozzie Trapilla will be your starting right tackle next year week 1, but they're not going to make that switch in season while Darnell Wright is still hurt and not currently practicing for the first practice of the Bears bye week. So I think this offensive tackle story isn't going to go away, even with a Theo Benedet change. And I don't think these offensive line problems are going to go away, even with Braxton Jones getting benched. And I want to take a closer look at some of the struggles Drew Dahlman and Jonah Jackson are having on the interior to see what hope there is for this to get better. That's next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Think about it with football players. From footwork to breath work, athletes sweat all the details. And Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anyone else. You can really feel that Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. It really helps you make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And with all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. So like the players, Mazda sweats every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda. Move and be moved. So Theo Benedet perhaps can be an upgrade at left tackle and can give you, at least in Ben Johnson's eyes, some better run blocking. And I think I would guess probably similar pass protection, where, again, Braxton Jones wasn't the worst pass blocking left tackle in football, but, below average, I would say, and I think slightly worse than that at left tackle. So maybe that spot gets a little bit better. Maybe it stays the same. We'll see. But I still don't think, even if Theo comes in and plays really, really well, there's still going to be offensive line issues here. Like, it's not going to be clean every single week, because we're still seeing far too many mistakes and errors on the interior from two of those new additions. Like, Joe Thuney's been fine. Maybe he hasn't been a Pro Bowl player, but he's been solid. No worries at all for me at the left guard spot. But center Drew Dahlman, and especially I think right guard Jonah Jackson, have both been subpar, I think, both in run blocking and in pass protection. And it's especially disruptive up the middle on the interior like that, where, like, if it's from the edge, we've seen Caleb get out of the pocket horizontally a little bit easier and have an easier time dealing with that kind of pressure. But, like, the interior is the tough stuff. And, like, we've seen Drew Dahlman be a quality center in Atlanta, and we've seen Jonah Jackson be a quality guard, years ago in Detroit. So I think they should be capable of better play than what we've seen so far. But when I started digging into it a little bit more, I'm not necessarily sure that's fully the case here. I think both of those players have certainly had a lot moments of being a lot better than what we've seen so far this year, but I think they've both been a little bit more up and down and inconsistent than maybe we give certainly Drew Dahlman credit for. I think we kind of knew Jonah Jackson would be a bit of a wild card given some of the struggles he's had, but I think the pass rush pressure numbers illustrate this very, very nicely. So I'm looking at this in terms of when this lineman is in pass protection, when they're pass blocking, how often do they give up a pressure? On what percentage of their pass blocking snaps are they giving up pressure? Because some guys might have more pressures if they have more pass blocking snaps, but if you look at it as a rate, then you can kind of get a sense of, like, okay, on a per snap basis, who is doing better or worse? And the things that stand out to me about both Jonah Jackson and Drew Dahlman is what we've seen from them through 4 games is pretty much on pace with what they've done over the last 4 years of their respective careers. So, like, the individual numbers, I don't think are that important. Jonah Jackson's at 5.2%, Drew Dahlman's at 5.8%. It's not important what that number is, it's how that number has or hasn't changed over time. And you look at Jonah Jackson, each of the last 4 seasons, he's been in between 5 and 6% pressure rate. Dating back to when he was a Pro Bowler in 2022 with the Lions, it was he's actually giving up a slightly higher rate of pressure that year than he is this year. Like, he's been essentially for the last 4 years in pass protection, giving up pressure at the same rate, despite the injuries, despite the position changes in Los Angeles and now moving to right guard for the Chicago Bears. Like, this is just who Jonah Jackson is, in pass protection. Like, I'd like to see fewer of those mistakes be communication errors where he's passing off a block to Drew Dahlman or doesn't pick up a block on a stunt. Like, I think those kind of things can get a little bit better and maybe even bring that number down a little bit. But like, this is who Jonah Jackson is. And I think we're going to have to live with this level of pass blocking from the right guard. And the story is mostly similar for Drew Dahlman, but there's a caveat there. That Drew Dahlman's pressure rate this year in 2025 is almost identical to what it was in 2023 and 2022. Like, his first 2 years as a starter for the Falcons, this is the kind of pass protection you're getting from Drew Dahlman. The interesting thing with him is that last year, 2024, before he got hurt, he was having the best season of his career. Certainly in terms of run blocking, but also in terms of pass protection. He cut his pressure rate almost in half. Last year was the career best pass blocking from Drew Dahlman. And of course, that's a great time when you're about to hit free agency and then get a huge contract from the Chicago Bears. And now we're kind of back to what Dahlman was before that. So maybe there's some hope that, hey, he was playing at a higher level last year, so can he get back to that higher level? Or was it just sort of a temporary stretch of a player who gets in a groove for a little bit, but maybe that's not fully who he is? That to me is kind of the concern here, that like Dahlman and Jackson are both just going to be mediocre pass blocking offensive linemen for the duration of their time as Chicago Bears starters. And that's not a fun feeling when we're in the first year of it. You know, Drew Dahlman is under contract for 2 more seasons after this, really 1 more guaranteed season, but still, you're definitely, you're not getting rid of Drew Dahlman in one offseason. And they gave Jonah Jackson the contract extension, so he's got 2 more years, and he's guaranteed to be back next season and at an even higher price. So like the next 2 the rest of this season and all of next season, it's going to be Drew Dahlman and Jonah Jackson, and their careers trajectories have been kind of where they are right now, at least in terms of the passing game specifically. We're going to talk about the running game a little bit in a second here. That's a slightly different conversation, but I'm thinking about kind of the pressure that Caleb Williams is having in the pocket. That, yeah, pretty much every game, there's going to be 1 or 2 plays where you get some pressure somewhere from that side, from that area. You don't get a lot of perfectly clean sheets from Jackson and Drew Dahlman. Like, if you think about it, like 5 or 6%, if you have 60 plays in a game, 5% of that's 3 plays. 3 plays a game, they're going to give up 3 pressures a game. I guess it wouldn't be 60 pass blocking plays. So I guess that math doesn't quite math out. But the point being, like, they're going to, if it's 5% of passing plays, and Caleb, let's go 30 passing plays, that's 1.5 pressures per game, is about, on average, what you should expect from these 2 guys. And I think you can live with that if that's your worst problem. But I think the problem with the Chicago Bears is you got the left tackle situation, right? Like, Darnell Wright, you trust and love. Joe Thuney, you trust and love. And I think you could live with either left tackle or this right guard center thing as the problem if the other one was not the problem. But having both as the problem at the same time is what is particularly disruptive to this Chicago Bears offensive line. So you hope that, the Theo Benedet addition can maybe settle down left tackle so that maybe the interior can kind of be a little bit more of your quote-unquote only problem there. But that's a problem that's not, like I said, that doesn't feel like it's actually going to go away. It's just a matter of, can we live with a couple of pressures coming from there every game? And I think, you can live with it for sure. Can you thrive with it? That's the real question. And that's what we're going to need to see. I think against bad pass rushes like the Dallas Cowboys, they'll get by just fine. Against better pass rushers like Max Crosby or like we saw from the Vikings defense, then you're going to have a lot more problems with it. And I think it's going to kind of be matchup dependent moving forward. Like, maybe next game against the Washington Commanders where they have a little bit to be desired in the pass rush department, this group will get by just fine. But then, when you face the Baltimore Ravens or, some of these other teams that have a little more juice on the edges and especially on the interior, I suppose, for the guards and the centers here, like, that's when it becomes a little bit more questionable and it's going to be more disruptive to the Bears' game plan. It would help if they could really get the running game going more and rely on that more. And that's also part of this offensive line issue. But we talked a little bit yesterday about maybe a run scheme and identity discrepancy here that I want to dive into a little bit deeper and kind of find out how the Bears are struggling to figure out exactly what they want to do on the ground game and what's going to work best for everyone involved in the ground game. So we'll take a look at the different run schemes and what Ben Johnson's options might be next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right, pick a bet, put down just $5, and if it hits, not only do you get the winnings from your $5 bet, but you also unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes watching football even more exciting when you got a little something riding on the action, especially this Sunday when the Bears are on a bye. So you're going to be seeing whatever's being broadcast in your local area, and you might not be that into it, but if you have $5 down looking for those bonus bets in your winnings, it can really make the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, investments, credit cards, bank accounts. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why Monarch Money is here. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. I've got the Monarch Money app on my phone, and I use it all the time because I was so sick of having to sign into 6 different apps to see my financial picture. You know, my credit card has an app and a password, and I'm glad they have passwords, but my bank account has a password, my retirement account has a password, my investment account has a password. With Monarch Money, they're all linked, and you can see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with promo code LOCKEDONNFL. So the Bears need to be better in pass protection, certainly, and some of that's just going to come down to Drew Dalman and Jonah Jackson being better, and maybe Theo Benedet trying to be better than Braxton Jones, although, I have some doubts that we're going to see a crazy difference with the change there. And I do predict that Braxton Jones, I think, has not started his last game as Chicago Bears left tackle, but that's, I think, going to be a little ways down the line. Benedet will have some time. But they also need to get the running game going here, and I think they're in a tough spot trying to find a running game identity and scheme that works well for everyone involved. We talked about this a little bit on yesterday's podcast, but I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into it right now because I think there's some clearer ways to illustrate it. I mean, that was something I kind of was just noticing from the Raiders game, but now I want to kind of dive in a little bit deeper and say, okay, season long, what are we seeing here? And I think there's different ways for Ben Johnson to approach this, but we heard him say in the preseason and training camp, like, they don't even know. At the time, they were still trying to figure out what kind of running team were they going to be. They're going to be a stretch zone team, or they're going to be a downhill gap scheme power team, and they were going to try and figure that out during training camp, and then in theory have that all squared away, good to go week 1, and running game should pick up and be good. Obviously, running game has not picked up and been good. I think Ben Johnson has generally been consistent in what he's calling. I don't think we're seeing necessarily him being all over the place in the running game in terms of the play calls. They have some bread and butter they've been trying to stick to and work through, and then when that's not working, they'll sprinkle in some other stuff. But as they reach the bye week and go into self-scouting mode, they're going to look back and say, okay, what's working, what's not working in the running game there? And I'm wondering if we do see them switch up their scheme a little bit in terms of what types of runs they're calling. Because a quick oversimplification, like football 101 type of conversation here. In football running game, there are 2 big buckets of run types, 2 big categories that most runs fall into one of these 2 categories. You've got zone blocking runs and gap blocking runs, sometimes called man blocking runs. The zone blocking runs are the classic where all 5 offensive linemen step the same direction. Outside zone, you're stretching those stretch handoff runs to the sideline where it's running backs running horizontally and then makes one cut upfield and goes. And the inside zone is very similar. It's just less of a wide angle, but everyone steps together. The offensive line flows, and you're blocking sort of areas as opposed to like specific people. I mean, you pick a person once you're going, but like you're kind of just moving as a whole. And then if a linebacker comes into your area, like you got to block him. Whereas like gap scheme runs, or sometimes called man blocking, everyone's got a designated gap and block. This is when you're pulling a guard from the back side to the front side, and everyone's blocking down, and the guard loops around them and lead blocks through the hole, or counter block where you pull two guys from the back side through the hole, or sometimes a play that's called duo where you just get two double teams straight up front and everyone's just sort of pushing downhill. Like that's zone versus gap scheme, and that's when Ben Johnson kind of talked about identity. Like, are we going to be more of a zone or more of a gap scheme team? Every team usually runs a little bit of both, but usually teams kind of have a slight preference towards one form or the other. And as we've seen this Bears offense so far this season, just under 60% zone, about 25% gap, and then about 15% is, like other stuff. The receiver handoffs, draw plays, different kind of option, quarterback scrambles and stuff like that. For the most part, the Bears have been 60% zone, 25% gap. Largely zone favor, but a little bit of gap in there. And it's interesting to me because the offensive line they've built with, starters from all sorts of different places here, all came from very different run schemes. And it feels like the Bears, there is no combination for Ben Johnson that fits everyone perfectly. That, Drew Dahlman famously comes from the Atlanta Falcons, where his bread and butter were those outside zone stretch run teams. The last year for the Falcons, he was like 75% zone. So the Bears are running less zone than what Drew Dahlman was really successful with last season, and more gap and man scheme than what Drew Dahlman was successful with last season. And it's not to say that that's the only reason they're not run blocking, or that Dahlman's not run blocking as well. And it's not to say that switching to more zone would instantly fix it all for Drew Dahlman, but I think it's something to be said about like, hey, these guys were more successful on previous teams doing it one way. The Bears are doing it a different way and not having as much success. But the problem is the Bears are kind of like right in this middle zone where they're less than Drew Dahlman, but then they're running more zone than some of the other offensive linemen we're used to. Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson on their previous teams ran more gap scheme than what the Bears are running now. Ben Johnson with the Detroit Lions ran a lot more gap scheme in 2023 and 2022 than what he's doing with the Bears this season. And Jonah Jackson had more success with some of those gap scheme runs. They were about 50% zone, 42% gap, and then sprinkling in kind of the rest. So like a lot more of an even mix there than right now, where they're mostly zone and a little bit of gap. And mostly zone is a little bit better fit for Drew Dahlman, but then not as good of a fit for Jonah Jackson. Maybe not as good of a fit for Joe Thuney coming from the Chiefs, where the Chiefs are probably the closest run scheme to what the Bears have right now. But as he gets older, I think it gets harder for him to get out in space and run. He might benefit from tighter windows and more physicality in a gap scheme offense. And then Darnell Wright last year in this Bears offense, they became a gap scheme team after they struggled in the running game early on. Last year with Shane Waldron, they tried to run zone the first 3 or 4 weeks. DeAndre Swift couldn't get anything going. They switched to more of a gap scheme offense. The offensive line blocked better. The running game got going. Swift ran better in those gap scheme runs. And so the Bears ran more gap than zone last season. And so it begs the question, is a similar switch necessary here? Because DeAndre Swift ran better on gap scheme runs last season. Darnell Wright blocked better on gap scheme runs last season. We've seen Jonah Jackson. I don't want to say he's been like worlds better, but he is used to more gap scheme, and I think has been in some ways better in some of those gap scheme styles of runs, I guess, over the course of his career. And then I think Joe Thuney can be better in some of those gap scheme runs. So it would be worse for Drew Dahlman, who also isn't blocking super well right now, but could be better for the other guys. And it just feels like the Bears are kind of stuck in this no man's land where it's like, you'd like to run more zone for Dahlman, but more gap for Darnell Wright and Joe Thuney. And it's like, you can't win either way. So they've kind of hovered somewhere in the middle. And I think it's contributed to having a lack of an offensive identity that I don't know if, I'm not saying the solution is like you lean into one and it's going to fix everything, but it just feels like that's something they need to reevaluate at the bye week and figure out, okay, is this working for everyone the way we thought it would? And it would feel like a little bit of a failure, and certainly it would definitely feel like a disappointment if Ben Johnson has to drastically change the run scheme to get things working, because like that was supposed to be the whole thing. Like if there was one thing Ben Johnson was going to come here and do was run the ball effectively and have the running game going. It was like, we might need to be patient with Caleb, but they'll be able to run the ball. And instead it's like, we got to be patient with the running game, but they're able to throw the ball. And it's just like, we had higher expectations for Ben Johnson. I think correctly, we appropriately had high expectations. He came in with high expectations. They hired him to have high expectations, and the running game has certainly fallen short. And if they realize, oh no, we schemed it wrong, it's a very bad look for them, for the thing they were supposed to be great at, for them to make essentially the same mistake Shane Waldron made last season. You don't want to have Ben Johnson and Shane Waldron making any of the same mistakes in theory. But I guess big picture, the most important thing is to get it right. And I'd rather they admit they're wrong and get it right than keep doing it wrong and never actually getting it right. And again, I'm not here to say that they are definitively doing it wrong, but if they identify it as being wrong, I'd rather they correct it than be stubborn and try and be the make it work because we think this is just what's going to work. Like at the end of the day, do what works best, but I would have liked them to be able to figure that out from the very start and not needed 4 games and a bye week to figure out whether or not that actually did need to change. So we'll keep a close eye on this Bears offensive line and the running scheme coming out of the bye week against the Washington Commanders. So you got to make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Bears podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen today, go check out Locked On NFL because it comes out twice a day. Once in the morning with Tyler Rowland and then a second episode in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins breaking down all the biggest stories across the National Football League. Then come on back tomorrow, make Locked On Bears your first listen again for another opportunity to bear down.